believe it or not only where you live, but around the world. And so even though my original motivation was to be able to offer something for your country, um, it turned out that um, lots of other people tuned in over time, especially on YouTube and especially in replay. And so that's why I'm doing it mainly, because, and also um, to honor my friend Thomas Arzt, who died in April from COVID. And so those
All
are
right.
all,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
So it's not only for you, but
I know.
and so you do not have to feel obliged to attend either. Um, you see, I've already got I've already got two people watching on YouTube, and I suspect there'll be more very soon. And so anyway, it's Sunday morning, and here we are. So uh, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll see who else arrives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so um, for anyone who might be new to this series of talks, um, I have been working through over the last 10 weeks um, a long essay by Dr. Thomas Arzt in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, um, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. Now, Thomas Arzt uh, wrote the first essay in this series. This is volume one. There are now 4 volumes to this series, and there's going to be a 5th next spring. And here's my friend Nick, who uh, often comes along with me from Singapore. Uh, Good morning, Nick, or good evening. Nice to see you. Um, so,
hi, morning, evening, yeah, but yeah.
yeah. So, anyway, Dr. Arzt wrote this profound essay at the beginning of this series, and um, I have been working through it as sort of slowly, in the sense that if English is not your first language, it may not be obvious what the depths of what Dr. Arzt was talking about are. And so what I'm doing is taking it sort of sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph and talking a little bit more about what these things mean. And so today we're going to talk about ion. Now, ion, and this is the part of this um, in which Dr. Arzt talks about ion. And so I'll just show you ion. Here's ion. This is volume 9-2 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And volume 9-1 is Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. But ion has a subtitle, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. And it's a book that, interestingly, Dr. Jordan Peterson calls terrifying. And so we're going to go back through and talk about why I think that Dr. Peterson might think it's terrifying, and why I think that we have to get beyond that terror. Okay, here's Nicole. Terrific. Anyway, and so I'll be talking about some of the things that Dr. Edinger spoke about, but we have previously discussed all of this in our advanced reading group. We did 32 sessions on ion, 32 two-hour sessions. So in an hour or so, I'm not going to be able to do anything like that. I can give you a few top of the mind points about ion, but it's something that takes a long time to review. And so I'm just going to begin. I'm on page 32. This essay goes to page 39. I know I'm not going to get to the end of it today because I know what's here, but we will keep going with it. Good morning or good evening, Nicole. Thank you for coming late at night for you.
Hey, thanks. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
So tonight I'm going to be talking about ion, or this morning, and so here's what Dr. Edinger said, or I'm sorry, Dr. Arzt said in his essay. Although his Red Book was somewhat intended for future readership, Jung was hesitant regarding its publication. Not until his near-death experience in 1944 and the visions witnessed there did the decision come to elaborate on his dialogue with the soul in his publication, Ion. And then there's this quote. Before my illness in 1944, I have often asked myself if I were permitted to publish or even speak of my secret knowledge. I later set it all down in Ion. I realized that it was my duty to communicate these thoughts, yet I doubted whether I was allowed to give expression to them. During my illness, I received confirmation, and I now knew that everything that had meaning and that everything was perfect, unquote. All right, so what was going on? Why did Jung say something that was so dramatic about what he was writing in Ion? Because he knew that it was going to shake people up. And what was going on was that he had been raised as the son of a Swiss Reformed pastor, a theologian, and his 7 uncles were all Swiss Reformed pastors. And so he was steeped in the religion of his day. And he was raised in the late 19th century. Everybody went to church. And so if you look at the interview with Dr. Jung, he was asked in a number of ways about his beliefs, and he was asked, and did you believe in God? And Jung said, oh, sure, everybody believed in God at that time. And did you go to church? Yes, everybody went to church. That was the way it was in the end of the 19th century. And even for me, even in the middle of the 1950s, let's say, when I was growing up, everybody went to church and everyone believed in God. So the issue was that Jung had finally realized through his work over decades that the stories about God that are contained in Western religion are magical thinking. They aren't true in the physical world. And so he later explained that in answer to Job, because he said that every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the physical world. And he said if it was in the physical world, then it would be in the books of natural science. In other words, you could go study theology like a scientist, and it would all be right there, but it's not. It's in the psyche instead. And so Dr. Jung started to make this differentiation between what is in the psyche and what is in the physical world. Now, in the East, and Nick, feel free to correct me anything you hear I say, or you want to please speak up if I say any of this wrong. But in the East, the religions of the East looked inside in the psyche all the time, always. And so in Tibet, in Tibetan Buddhism, they call themselves Nangpa, which means insiders. They look inside for their guidance. And I'll just share a short anecdote with a screen. I hope you can see this all right, because I have a fairly small picture here, but this is the great Buddha at Kamakura, Japan. And I first met this statue, which is called the Daibutsu, the great Buddha, when I was 15 years old in 1962. And I remember thinking when I was 15 years old, what is this guy doing? I didn't understand it at all. And it wasn't until years later that I understood about meditation. And so in most Eastern religions, there's a deep understanding that one will meditate and will look inside. And that has to do with finding your God image inside and finding your guidance inside. But in Western religions, they are very, or at least the extroverted Abrahamic religions, God was always outside. And so we in the West always looked for God outside. And so the point is that we the point is that God is up there according to Western religions. It's not in here. And the problem emerged very actively in the late 19th century that that God is dead. That's what Nietzsche said. He said, God is dead and we have killed him. And what he meant by that is that there isn't actually in the physical world a God like that. It's magical thinking that developed in the Abrahamic religions over thousands of years. And so it was tradition. And so when Jung says, I doubted whether I was allowed to give expression to them. In other words, he was realizing this, and he's looking around himself, and everybody's still in this magical thinking type of mindset. And he wondered what would happen. And of course, the reason Jordan Peterson, and I just surmised this intuitively, the reason he calls ion terrifying is that basically in ion, and Dr. Jung said this. And so chapter 5 of Ion is a chapter entitled Christ as a symbol of the self. Now, what he meant by that is that the driving force, the divine force that pushes all of us along, whether it's us individually or our societies, is a source that is bigger than our consciousness, way bigger. And so Dr. Jung later explained that that he equated God with the unconscious. And so, in your own life, likely that sometimes you were pushed to do things that you weren't thinking of doing consciously, but nonetheless, you were forced to do them, whatever they were. And that's your God image, yourself pushing you. And so let me show a couple of images from Dr. Edinger's the Ion lectures, which are a godsend to people like me who can't figure these things out directly, but have to have somebody intermediate. So first I want to share a figure from the Ion lectures. Just a moment. Okay, so this is how our ego develops. And on the left, you have the way you are when you're born. Your ego is subsumed in yourself. And the self represents the individual God image. And as you develop during your lifetime, your ego starts to emerge from the self. And the ego is everything in your conscious mind. So when you're between ages 0 to 3, you're born into chaos. You have no idea what's going on. And by careful observation over 2 or 3 years and watching what your mother does and your father does, you are gradually learning something about the world. And typically when a child gets to be about 3 years old, they say no to something mom says. In other words, they disagree with mom. And that is the point at which the ego is emerging from the self and starting to develop a unique individual. And so gradually, as you go through childhood, your ego becomes stronger and stronger until ultimately it's outside the self. But it doesn't mean that the self isn't there. It's still there. It's still unconscious. And the ego is everything that you have in your conscious mind. But your self pushes you to understand or to do whatever it pushes you to do. So Christ, in his case, as Dr. Jung explains in Ion, had an ego, and his ego said that his mission in life was to be the Son of God. And so he, especially in the last 3 years of his life, when we have his teachings and his ministry, he was to play this role in the physical world, and he did. And so when we say that he was the God-man, as the Son of God, he was indeed, because on the cross, he said, my Father, why have you forsaken me? And what he meant by that was that he was in pain, so he was feeling the pain of his crucifixion, and he was expecting to die more quickly, probably, and so that, as Dr. Jung said, that was the evidence that he was both a man and God. He played his role otherwise exactly as his Father in heaven had told him to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that all of us in the West should go out and pick up a cross and go up on Golgotha and get ourselves hung on it. That's not what it means at all. It means that every one of us will have something coming from our insides, our self, our God image that tells us what we should be doing in life. Each one of us has that. And so in my case, over the last 10 years or so at least, I've been pushed to teach, offer courses and understanding about the work of C.G. Jung. And so myself requires me to be here this morning. And Yuan was suggesting that, I really don't have to be here on a Sunday morning and my time. And I would say, well, yes, from a physical American human being point of view, I don't have to be here, and I could be sleeping late on a Sunday morning, but my God image, myself, tells me that I have to do this, that this is at this point in my life, and these things change over time, but at this point in my life, nothing is more important to me than what I'm doing on the internet with Dr. Jung's work. And I do it quite often, as you know, and trying to help people understand what he was talking about. And this is myself, my God image, what I'm told to do. And so I'm going to continue to do it as long as I'm able. I'm about to turn 74 years old, so that may not be too much longer, but for now, that's what I'm doing. But that also applies, it also applies to our collectives. So it applies to our countries and to the collective unconscious. And Dr. Jung was talking about, the collective unconscious in the Red Book, and that was his big, unique discovery, that we actually learn things from our group, and our group changes in subtle ways that we don't necessarily know. And so if you meet an American, regardless of, and by that I mean a citizen of the United States of America, you will meet, and it doesn't matter whether they are, what their national origin, what their religion of origin is, or anything. An American is a very unique individual. And, Australians are unique in different ways. Because Australians were evolved from other features that developed over hundreds of years, and the same with Singaporeans. Singaporeans are typically, in Singapore, there's a statue called the Four Chopsticks, and the Four Chopsticks represent the four races or nationalities of people that live in Singapore. And they too are quite unique and more ecumenical than, say, a country like China, where there are vast numbers of people that are all from the Han Chinese, let's say. I guess Han Chinese would be the right way of referring to it. It isn't that all Chinese are exactly the same. That's not the case at all, of course. But and you know, the Great Wall was built there to keep barbarians out of China over a 1,500-year period, but it didn't work too well because the Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan and those men were Mongols, and they actually took over China for a period of time, and so but China has its own unique characteristics also. And so each country has an unconscious way of being in the world. And this, it's not that this doesn't change over time, it does change, but it in the fullness of time, you start to see the characteristics of these different types of people. And so, and it doesn't matter where you come from. If you come to the United States, by the time you reach citizenship in the United States, you're actually much more American than you are the native country from which you came. And so it's not easy to figure out based on country of origin or religion or race what people are in this country. But so Americans have a certain collective unconscious about us. And so what Dr. Jung had been worried about here was that he had been raised in a certain way in the church where there was this magical thinking that had gone on, and yet he's in the generation after Nietzsche who says that God is dead. In other words, those magical thinking ideas that the church was selling were simply not true. And it goes back to Galileo and to Copernicus and those men looking up at the sky, and Kepler, and saying, the sun doesn't orbit the earth orbits the sun. And Galileo got himself run up before the Inquisition for that, and he swore on a stack of Bibles that the sun orbits the earth, and he did that to save his life, to avoid being burned at the stake for going against the church. So we have the abjuration of Galileo Galilei, what he testified before the Inquisition, and he knew that they were keeping good records, but he knew that they were what they were selling wasn't the truth. So he simply parroted what they were expected him to say in order to save his life. And so his penalty at the end of that trial was that he may never look through a telescope again, which was okay with him because he was already blind from staring at the sun through a telescope, which wasn't a very good idea. But in those days, people didn't know what they were doing when they were looking through telescopes and magnifying the sun. And so he was blind, but in the next 4 years, he lived another 4 years after that. And in that 4 years, he invented at least 2 new sciences, one of which is quantum mechanics. And so his life was quite unique, and his swearing on the stack of Bibles basically made monkeys of those theologians at the Vatican for all time, because he knew that everybody would know in later years when the scientific method carried on forward. He knew that he knew that we would know that he was lying when he swore on the Bible. and so he's a very smart man in that way. Okay, but I'm putting this out in a very blatant way, and I have the ability to do that now thanks to Jung, because if Jung didn't have this visionary experience in 1944 and start to write his books, and therefore Edinger wrote his books which explained Jung, I may never have figured it out. And certainly I remember, let me bring up the great Buddha again just for a minute here. I only have to find it on my screen. Sometimes it's hard to move around my screens because I have so many things going on it. But all right, so here I am at age 15 in 1962, and I went to see this Buddha. Well, just outside of this temple where the Buddha lives, there are two very fierce-looking devils. Okay, and they're in a box on just outside. They're in effect protecting the great Buddha, but that isn't what they're doing. Actually, they represent the chaos of life. And the idea of Buddhism is that you're going to step through the chaos, you're going to step past those devils, and you're going to step into the peace of meditation. And so, but when I saw those guys, they were very fierce. And when I saw them in 1962, I go, whoa, what is this all about? And so you can see how peaceful the Buddha looks. But just outside that is the chaos. And this is why we think about chaos all the time, and why we have to learn to manage our lives in such a way that we can differentiate ourselves from that chaos. And it's become harder and harder for younger generations through my lifetime, and I say this often, but in the 16th century, the average human being got in a lifetime only as much information as is in today's Sunday New York Times. So if you went down to the store today and picked up the New York Times, that would be about the amount of information that a human being would get in a whole lifetime. And so in those days, only 400 years ago, you would be totally reliant on the wise people in your community to tell you what the world is about. And they would tell you according to the traditions that they had and developed over many years. And this happened in all parts of the world. And certain wise people emerged, and they were leading societies. And most people never challenged it. So even in 1944, Dr. Jung, who was a psychiatrist and the son of pastors, theologians, he was raised in a theological environment. He doubted whether he was permitted to say the things that he had discovered. And that's the essential issue that is is present here, and why many people have tried to prevent Jung even today from getting a wider audience. And, you know, for years I said, why don't Jungian analysts get more information out to the public? And the reason is that they created a clinical psychology practice, which is quite valuable to many people. And if they wanted to do that practice and earn a living as clinical psychologists, they couldn't be criticizing religions as they're presented, because they would just get run out of town on a rail. And so they just kept their mouth shut and worked with individuals instead. And maybe the individuals never understood these points. Maybe many Jungian analysts never understood these points. And it was only when the Red Book was published in 2009, 48 years after Dr. Jung's death, that we really started to get a clearer picture of what he had been talking about throughout his lifetime. His psychology had to be completely rethought at that point. And so that's why this series now, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions by Murray Stein and Thomas Arzt, volume 1, but there are 4 volumes, going to be 5 volumes of this series. And this represents a total rethinking of what Dr. Jung was about during his whole career. And that's why I think that Thomas Arzt's essay is so profound. Okay, so let's see what else I have to talk about. Okay, I'm going to show you one more diagram here. And this is also from Dr. Edinger's The Ion Lectures. And in this diagram, Dr. Edinger is talking about the structure of the psyche. And so I showed you earlier how the ego emerges from the self and gets its own distinct characteristics, which are consciousness. So all of your consciousness is up here in one of these circles. But you are seeing the world through an anima or an animus, depending on whether you're a man or a woman. And those things are linked. There is a syzygy, which if you think about what a syzygy is, a syzygy in the East would be the yin yang symbol, okay, which it means that they are opposites. They cannot be taken apart, but they're both part of a whole. So all of us have a certain measure of animus and a certain measure of anima within us. We fall, our psyches, each one of our psyches falls on a scale between those two extremes, and it changes over time depending on what the situation is. And then we have deep inside the self. This is the driving force within us, whether it's the driving force of us as individuals or the driving force of our society. And it manifests personally in our personal unconscious, but it also manifests as history, as the universe, as the world, and as the universe in space-time. So there is something that is emerging, which in Jungian psychology we call the self, or we call the God image. And the shadow is certainly a part of all of all of our egos, because it represents the yin or the yang in our psyches. Let's see if I can give you I happen to have a yin and yang symbol here, which is one you may not have seen before. Okay, so this is a yin and yang symbol, and here represents masculine and feminine. And this yin and yang symbol is in motion. So some things are conscious, let's say, that are represented by white, but when certain things become conscious, other things become unconscious. And this process is going on all the time. It's going in around in a circle, but it's always captured within the circle. So this is a syzygy. It's inescapable. And as new things become conscious, other things become unconscious. And so we're always dealing with our unconscious. And our unconscious may be the best part of ourselves. So for a man, sometimes men in the United States refer to their wife as their better half. And so why she's their better half, maybe they aren't very clear about why that is so, but nonetheless it is so. And for women, because you're projecting the animus out on a male human being, even though it's somebody else you like, it's really a part of yourself that you like. I hope that's clear. But anyway, so that's that. All right. So anyway, Ion is, the subtitle of it is Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, which is here. And what that means is that Dr. Jung was trying to understand how the self really works in terms of not only our own psyche, but also the combined psyche of our societies. And so, for example, if right now we have the American election campaign going on. And so let's talk about prophecy for a moment and prophets, because the point that Drs. Edinger and Jung make about prophets is that prophets actually are not magically coming up with things. They're simply saying that based on history, I mean, they're not saying this explicitly, but this is what it really is, that based on his history, this is what they predict will happen. Okay, and so I'll make a very bold prophecy here. Okay, and my bold prophecy, because we have the American election campaign going on, and obviously that has engaged the entire collective unconscious of the United States. And so all Americans are embroiled in this thing because our cable news channels have been haranguing us about this controversy for the last 4 years. And actually, as long as there's been television, but certainly in the last 4 years, it's been extremely egregious. And, you know, in the physical world, it's not really like that. I mean, I go to the local grocery store and there are people of every religion, color, perspective on the world at that grocery store, and we get along perfectly well. Okay, we all go buy our food and go home and eat it. And, you know, we all go to the movies together, and, you know, there's not this horrible battle royal going on in the US, but if you watch cable news, you might think that there is. And so it's definitely true that everybody is feeling, depressed or somehow psychically upset about what's going on in American society right now. And to a large extent, that is going to be changed in a profound way after our election. And so I'm at this point prepared to make a prophecy. It'll be a broad, bald prophecy, and I'm sure it will be wrong. But nonetheless, I'll tell you why I'm making it, or how I'm making it. And my prophecy is that Donald Trump will lose the election by a landslide. And the reason that I believe that is that I can just feel it intuitively. I can feel that he will lose. Now, does that mean, and that, the majority of American people want him to lose? Now, it doesn't mean that the election can't be stolen again by interference by international actors. And so, there's a lot of talk about whether Russians or Chinese or North Koreans or Iranians are trying to influence our election. And of course, that's always been true. There has been an attempt to influence. And so it does, my prophecy is based on what I believe to be true if there was no state action trying to steal away our elections. So my prophecy may be wrong, but from the point of view of how the American people feel and want, we will look at the popular vote on November 3rd, and there will just be a huge majority voting against the president. Now, from a popular vote point of view, now, because of the way our society is set up with the Electoral College, even though more people vote against the president, as they did in 2016, he might win and he might still be president. So I'm only talking about what the collective of the American people wants. And with respect to that, I expect that the majority will be even bigger than it was in 2016, that he 3 million more of us voted against him than voted for him in 2016. And I expect that number to be even bigger, maybe 5 or 6 million coming into this current election. But that's my prophecy. And we'll see whether I'm right. All right. So I'm going to go on with Dr. Arst's essay here. So we've just been talking about what Dr. Jung felt that he got permission when he had his vision in 1944. He received permission from his psyche, from the collective psyche, from the God image, wherever it was. His perception was that he had permission to say what he knew. And so that's what he started to do. And so most of his main influential books relating to culture came after that time, to include Ion, Answer to Job, and Mysterium Conjunctionis. And and so so then here's what Dr. Arzt is saying about it. Ion, therefore, can be read as Jung's commentary on his experiences put down in his Red Book. So he had already had these experiences actually 40 years before, or 30 years before the visions. And now he's commenting on those visions. And Jung's initial painting in Liber Novus, found at the beginning of the first chapter, The Way of What Is to Come, illustrates this secret knowledge. Okay, so let me, I forgot that I needed to get that image up on my screen. So just give me a moment and I will share that image with you, because it is an image that contains the secrets that he's talking about. Now, you may not get it all from the image, but maybe you will. And so let me bring it up here for you. Okay. So here's the first image that's in the Red Book. And as you can see, Dr. Jung was writing in German calligraphy, the Red Book, and it is embellished to the extent that there are paintings around some of the letters. And so, so the first letter is the letter D. And in this painting, you have all the secret knowledge. So he is talking about how we all evolved out of the sea, and that's the way the sea is even today. And now we can ride upon the sea in a ship, and we've built up civilization. And this snake represents the development of our psyche over millions of years through passions of all of our ancestors, not all of whom were human, to the point where we got up to human consciousness, and that's represented by this crown. And across the top of this, you see some of the images, some of the symbols for the zodiac, the Western zodiac, including the sun here, of course. And the sun is in the position between Pisces and Aquarius. And so Dr. Jung is making a reference to astrology here. And so I'm going to describe to you why astrology is important here, because a lot of people think that astrology is just humbug. And actually it says a lot about us and psychologically. And this is true both in the West, in China. If you look at the Chinese zodiac, the 12-year cycle of the Chinese zodiac, they describe people born in certain years as of a certain animal. And I certainly can confirm that as a dog year person, I was born in 1946, which was the year of the dog. And the characteristics that are ascribed to dogs by the Chinese actually does describe my personality. Dogs are very loyal, for example, so I tend to be quite loyal. And what in astrology, what has happened over thousands of years is that human beings said, well, if this is what's happening, in the universe, then this is the way it will be. And lo and behold, over thousands of years, as people have thrown away things that weren't true and kept things that were true, ultimately they become very true. And this is true of Western astrology, and this is true of Chinese astrology. And so we need to start paying a lot more attention to these things. So reading on. Jung's initial painting in Liber Novus, which is the name of the Red Book, by the way, found at the beginning of the first chapter, The Way of What Is to Come, illustrates this secret knowledge. After about 2150 years, the Christian eon, the Piscean age, the age of Pisces, is nearing its end. So in other words, in the set point in Western astrology, it's moving across, and we're about to enter the age of Aquarius. And so the Piscean age is nearing its end. And so the Piscean age has been the whole Christian age. Humanity is now facing an epochal period of transition, the dawning of a new age. A closer examination of the painting on the first page of Liber Novus discloses Jung's view of the universe and of man's journey through time. In the middle of the picture, an old ship is ready to set sail. I probably should put that back up on the screen so that you can refer to it as I read. So in the middle of the picture, an old ship is ready to set sail. A medieval town is present in the background. Underneath the water's surface, inhabitants of the ocean's depths are discernible. Below them lies the fiery fluid basalt of the Earth's volcanic interior. At the top of the painting, a four-rayed sun is seen in the heavens, traveling on its ecliptic path through zodiacal signs. In Jung's illustration, the sun is positioned between the signs of Pisces and Aquarius, while one of the four rays reaches onward to the astrological sign of Aquarius, the coming age. Jung is here clearly referring to the astronomical phenomenon of the zodiacal precession of the equinoxes. Approximately every 2,150 years, a period known as the Platonic month, this astronomical precession causes a gradual shifting of the vernal equinox into the preceding sign of the zodiac. In the late Hellenistic age, that's the Greek age, it was calculated that the equinox would move or precess through the entire circle of the 12 zodiacal constellations over a period of roughly 25,800 years. This period came to be called a Platonic year. Recently, the International Astronomical Union calculated that the precession through the entire zodiac takes exactly 25,771.58 years. So the Greeks were off by 29 years, and they did that 2,000 years ago. At the last turn of the times, which occurred around 200 years before the Christian era, the vernal equinox transitioned from Aries into Pisces. This was the beginning of the Piscean age. Now, over 2 millennia later, we have arrived at the end of the Piscean age. Looking at these astronomical phenomena with an acausal synchronistic approach, Jung saw that humanity is on the threshold of a new age, the Aquarian age. Within this difficult phase of ional transition, immense difficulties can be expected. Jung perceived that these epochal transitions between Platonic months go hand in hand with the metamorphosis of the gods. The period of transition between eons is therefore always accompanied by pronounced anxiety, confusion, and melancholia. Okay, so this is this transitional period. So what I'm talking about in terms of metamorphosis of the gods then is Jung's belief, and that's actually going to be in next week's session, but Jung's understanding that the gods would change in a way that that rather than one man god in the form of Jesus, that all of us would begin to see that God actually resides in us and in our societies. And it's up to us to, first of all, perceive what the wonders of the universe. And it's up to us to decide what is intended by this evolution. Basically, that's what it is. So that's the age of the Holy Ghost, and I'll be discussing that in this essay next week. Okay, but here's what Dr. Jung says about this in Ion. He says, "My thoughts about this world were not and are not enjoyable. The drive of the unconscious toward mass murder on a global scale is not exactly a cheering prospect. Transitions between the eons always seems to have been melancholy and despairing times, as for instance, the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt between Taurus and Aries, or the melancholy of the Augustinian age between Aries and Pisces. And now we are moving into Aquarius, and we are only at the beginning of this apocalyptic development." Now, partially what Dr. Jung was talking about was World War II, because he was writing this just after, or maybe started to write it just at the late stages of World War II. So he was seeing that the apocalyptic things were happening, and of course, if the metamorphosis of the gods, in other words, for 2,000 years, people were seeing God as out there, and life went on, and then suddenly the scientific revolution comes along and said, no, there's no God up there. There's no being up there running around with wings. And so what is God? I mean, that's what Jung is talking about. What is the metamorphosis of the gods? And Jung posits that this is the Paraclete, the Holy Ghost, and that Christ actually promised this. In other words, Christ said that he was the Son of God, and but that he had to leave in order for the Paraclete, which is the Holy Ghost, to come. And so that means that each of us must be infused with the spirit of the divine. And either you feel it and you recognize that this is what's happening, or you don't. As it happens, I do feel that way. And so I'm not saying that I'm God. I'm saying that all of us in our collective are God, in effect. And that in the collective of the human race, it's us as a collective, the collective unconscious, that's going to decide whether our planet is actually going to survive or not, or whether all life on Earth will be destroyed. And we've actually given ourselves that power through nuclear weapons in the 20th century, that we could destroy all life on Earth. We have that power. And so, if people with the spirit that understand this don't do the right things, the human species can simply destroy itself, and not only our species, but all life on Earth. And so we have that godlike power, and so we have to enact life. I mean, I urge you to listen to the discussion that Becca Tarnas gave us a week ago, 2 weeks ago today, on the 30th of August. She talked about how human beings are basically enacting the will of God. And I can point to that in terms of our one common problem globally, which is the Earth going to survive as a livable place, or is it not? And that question is an unanswered question at this point, and it's a question for all of us, no matter where we live and how we live. We all live in this one leaky lifeboat, and we have about 20 miles worth of atmosphere up above us that we can breathe. I mean, the atmosphere goes out maybe 60 miles in total, but after 20 miles, there's not much there. And even after 10,000 feet, which is only 2 miles, the atmosphere isn't really enough to support human life. And so, are we going to make the changes as a species that will be needed for us to survive and for the rest of creation to survive, or are we not? And that will be determined by the will of God, and that will of God is going to emerge in the form of the will of the collective unconscious to pay attention to that or not. All right, so Dr. Jung said, his thoughts were not enjoyable. Okay. So anyway, the last sentence that he said, and we are only at the beginning of the apocalyptic development. Already I am a great grandfather twice over and see those distant generations growing up, who long after we are gone will spend their lives in the darkness. Unquote. The development, with its seemingly nihilistic trend toward disintegration, must be understood as the symptom and symbol of a mood of universal destruction and renewal that has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, and philosophically. We are living in what the Greeks called the right moment, kairos. For a metamorphosis of the gods, or the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and sciences. And so the point is that we as a species are changing. It's very subtle, but if you happen to be the least bit intuitive, you might get it. And so this is the cheery news that Dr. Jung was giving in Ion. Okay, So that was the end of the quote. Dr. Arzt goes on. The Christian age is coming to an end, and we are a witness to this epochal turning point in human consciousness. The new age, the way of what is to come, corresponds with the formulation of a new image of God. Jung's outlook points to the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit, who, quote, is the spirit of physical and spiritual procreation, who from now on shall make his abode in creaturely man. The future indwelling of the Holy Ghost in man amounts to a continuing incarnation of God. It is the task of the Paraclete, the Spirit of Truth, to dwell and work in individual human beings so as to remind them of Christ's teachings and lead them into the light. And so basically, Dr. Jung is saying that we are the continuing incarnation of God. And so Miles says on the YouTube channel, con means with, and science means thinking, yes. And but Jung emphasized 4 functions, not just thinking. Is there a word that encapsulates the 4 functions? Yes, individuation, that's the word. And we have to individuate not only as individuals, but also as a species. We need to see that all 4 functions are fulfilled. And Miles says, emotion is essential to find the truth. Yes, I agree. And like and share this important presentation. Yes, thank you. And by the way, I'm going to read one more really profound thing. But before I do that, I want to also mention to everyone that if you like what we're doing here, please, I can keep you informed of the programs that we do, because we're doing many profound programs, but you need to register, because I can't just take your email address and put it in for you. I need for you to let me know that you want to be informed, and then you will be on the mailing list. So this link that I've just put onto the chat on both YouTube and the Zoom chat is expressly for that purpose. If you go to that link, you can register for the parts of our program that you might find most interesting, and then you will receive email notices at your request for those sessions. And for people who are generally watching us, there is a Dropbox, and it's generally available, and I'm going to give you the link to that. I'll put that on the YouTube chat, and I will put that Dropbox on the Zoom as well. And that link gives you a lot of the information that I've made available over the last over 4 years of work on this YouTube channel. And so you can find a lot of good information there. And there is another Dropbox, which is available only to the advanced reading group. And so what you can do is if you go to the MailChimp registration, you can also indicate your interest in the advanced reading group. And in the advanced reading group, we have completed long teachings, long seminars on both ion and Mysterium Conjunctionis. So there are 32 sessions there on ion, and there are 45 sessions on Mysterium Conjunctionis in the playback for the advanced reading group. Those sessions are not available on YouTube. They are only available on Dropbox to our private group. And so if you want to join that, you can connect to us. And that's the registration email or link that I've provided. All right, so I want to go on with one other thing. So Dr. Arzt is saying that we have to be the incarnation of God, and there's no doubt that we as a species have to be. And the reason that we need politicians who have experiences building up into their level of development, the appropriate level of development, the reason for that is that you wouldn't want God to be a toddler. You want someone who's mature and understands all the levers of power and so on to be in charge, because otherwise you have this red button in front of you, and a toddler might say, oh boy, let's push this red button, see what happens, and without understanding the consequences. And so we had early in the Trump administration, we have them saying, well, why don't we use nuclear weapons? Let's just use them. Okay, well, there are very good reasons why we don't use them. One of those is that, scientists differ, but the number is, if we explode in the atmosphere between 23 and 100 nuclear weapons, we will destroy life on this planet. And so although scientists disagree about how many it will take, the number is small, okay, whether it's 23 or 100. And so the point is that we can't just go willy-nilly running around exploding nuclear weapons. That simply cannot be. And if we're developed in the military, for example, we know that. And so people do understand the enormity of what decisions like that are. And if we elect a politician who doesn't understand that enormity, we put our whole planet at risk, honestly. And so this is why we want government leaders who have been through a lot of education, a lot of training in how these things interact, so that they will then keep us safe and make the judicious decisions that have to be made. This was even known in Truman and Oppenheimer's time and Einstein's time, when they realized that they could build an atomic bomb. They realized what the enormity of the situation was then, and they had to make a judgment in wartime, they had to make the judgment of how many people were killed. Was it going to be 100,000 killed immediately, as they were in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or was it going to be 1 million killed because of the Allies' invasion of the main islands of Japan, which is what was predicted. And so those are very weighty decisions. They involve a lot of issues, but honestly, I lived in Japan for 8 years, and 3 of those years were shortly after the war. And many Japanese thought that America did the right thing to use the atomic bomb because it ended the war. And that's all well and good, but it also shows us how very weighty these decisions are. And Miles correctly points out Hiroshima was the equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT, and we now have weapons that have the power of 15 million tons of DNT, absolutely. And so anyway, okay, let's go back to the metamorphosis of the gods. And so we're going to read on here. Okay, so what Dr. Arzt is saying is, thereby the incarnatio continua, the continuing incarnation of the Holy Spirit in mortal man, becomes the signature of a new spirituality in the coming eon. And then he quotes Jung from a letter that Dr. Jung wrote to the Reverend Morton T. Kelsey on the 3rd of May, 1958. And this is what Dr. Jung said. We are still looking back to the Pentecostal events in a dazed way instead of looking forward to the goal of this that the Spirit is leading us to. Therefore, mankind is wholly unprepared for the things to come. Man is compelled by divine forces to go forward to increasing consciousness and cognition, developing further and further away from his religious background because he does not understand it anymore. His religious teachers and leaders are still hypnotized by the beginnings of a then new eon of consciousness, instead of understanding them and their implications. What one once called the Holy Ghost is an impelling force, creating wider consciousness and responsibility, and thus enriched cognition. The real history of the world seems to be the progressive incarnation of the deity. And so what Dr. Jung is saying here is very simply, the Spirit is pushing all of us to develop more and more consciousness all the time. And, you know, when we say consciousnit, what he means is awareness, which one of his disciples also talked about, but it means that we have to be aware of what can happen if the wrong people get in charge and the wrong decisions are made. And we can't just say, oh, well, this is the way politicians are, and you know, it'll work itself out. Well, it won't. And so all of us need to take a responsibility for the future, because we all have a piece of the divine within us. Our piece, my piece of the divine, is going to make a decision in a certain way on November 3rd. And each of you, if you're an American citizen, should be doing the same thing. And what that decision will be, I don't know. I mean, it will be the will of God, in effect, because it will be the will of the collective, and, you know, to include the interferences. So, you know, the interferences of other nations in our electoral process are part of the will of God too. And so, you know, we will have a president in January, a new president, or a president from January 20th at noon, who is based on the will of God. And, you know, that will could be pretty disastrous for us, possibly. And, you know, this goes back to the time of answer to Job, so 500 years BC, and what Dr. Jung was talking about in his book Answer to Job, which is that Job had made a bet with the devil or God had made a bet with the devil that Job couldn't stop Job from believing in God, and he couldn't. And but Job had to appeal to the good side of God, okay, And in terms of what we're talking about here, to the good side of the collective unconscious, to let him live a peaceful and successful life, which ultimately did happen. And so we all need to look to ourselves and look to our societies to make the right decisions. And that will be the hand of God on all of us. And so it appears that the decision that we are making in the United States on November 3rd is a decision which is going to vastly influence how the world will be going forward, because of the power of the United States and its influence on many aspects of life around the world. The decision we make can affect other people's lives quite dramatically. And we have to understand that these things are now global decisions. They're not just individual nation state decisions. And, we're seeing it in California right now, but, the global climate change it can't be denied. I mean, we look at pictures of Beijing in smog, and you can't see your hand in front of your face. We see the American West now going up in flames, but it's not only liberals on the American West Coast that are going up in flames. It's also conservatives in the American Midwest who are getting hit by more and more severe tornadoes and hurricanes. And we as a species have to do something about this if we can. And we do have the power to make the changes that need to be done, but we need to have a global will to do it. So the human species is going to decide whether our leaky lifeboat in the form of the Earth is going to support us and allow the species to live or not. It's as simple as that. And I'm not saying it's that if we go on as we are, that we'll destroy the Earth in 500 years. It may take 500,000 years, but in terms of the length of the history of the Earth, that's a blink in time. And it's up to us to decide as a species how the next step will be taken. As Dr. Jung said in his The Eternal Moment, we must in every moment select for the best of the possibilities. Okay, so I am going to end this discussion at this point, because next week we're going to be talking about the age of the Holy Ghost and the Paraclete. And so I'm just going to read this quote from Martin T. Kelsey again, just to set in your minds again the issue that is going on. We are still looking back to the Pentecostal events. Now, the Pentecostal events were the events where after Christ's death, Christ came back and was seen in vision by his apostles. And it was the time when he showed the holes in his hands to doubting Thomas, to the apostle Thomas. And so that story, what has been carried on through Christianity for 2,000 years, and therefore it's archetypal. It doesn't matter whether it physically happened or not. It does not matter one whit whether it physically happened or not, because the story is archetypal, and the story has been repeated over and over again, not only in churches, but by artists and that sort of thing. And so it's become embellished and become archetypal. And so it actually happened in the psyche of, of the West. And whether or not it physically happened isn't the point. And and many people believe it physically happened, and that's fine, but we can't be hypnotized by that. We must be aware that we're physically alive today, and we have to look at these events that were recounted to us and find what is the meaning of these things to us. So we're still looking back to the Pentecostal events in a dazed way, instead of looking forward to the goal of the Spirit is leading us to. Okay, so the point is that the Spirit is impelling us. I mean, you can't tell me what you're going to be doing 2 minutes from now, because the Spirit within you is going to tell you what to be doing. And that will be either continuing to listen to Skip, or it will be turning it off and going and doing something else. But for sure, nobody can tell you even 2 minutes from now what you will be doing, because the Spirit is going to decide that. And so the Spirit is taking us somewhere. And the question is, where? Okay. And so as a species, we need to try to understand that. Therefore, mankind is wholly unprepared for the things to come. In other words, if we thought about where the Spirit is trying to take us, we could figure it out, but we haven't done that yet. Man is compelled by divine forces to go forward to increasing consciousness and cognition, developing further and further away from his religious background, because he does not understand it anymore. So it's very simple. The scientific method has poo-pooed religion as false, but it's not false. It's true. It's 100% true. And all religions are true as psychic facts. And so knowing that, we need to know how we need to change. And what it means. Okay, so we don't understand our religions anymore. His religious teachers and leaders are still hypnotized by the beginnings of a then new eon of consciousness, instead of understanding them and their implications. So we don't understand what the implications of all of our religions are. What one once called the Holy Ghost is an impelling force. Okay, remember from Star Wars, the Force be with you. It's an impelling force, creating wider consciousness and responsibility, and thus enriched cognition. Okay, so when we become more aware, with greater knowledge comes greater responsibility. The real history of the world seems to be the progressive incarnation of the deity. And so at the end of Answer to Job, Dr. Jung, in the very last paragraph of Answer to Job, Dr. Jung talked about the Christification of many. So instead of everyone pointing to Jesus Christ as the only God-man or God-woman, we need to understand that all of us are the sons and daughters of God, and all of us make our contribution to the awareness and cognition of the world, and we all have to take our responsibility. And it doesn't mean that we can get inflated. Oh, wow, I'm God, I can decide, and boom, I'm going to decide this. Well, it doesn't work that way. From a collective point of view, our our societies are going to decide what's good for our societies. And so that's the equivalent of God deciding, because based on that decision, people will live or die. Our communities will be destroyed by climate change, or they won't. And so those are godlike decisions, and we have to understand them as that. And so, okay, looking back at the YouTube channel for a minute. And so Ali Rasa says, great presentation as always, respect and appreciate from a Pakistani fan. Well, thank you. Salam alaikum. And someone from North Carolina is listening. And Miles says, solar radiation management could be reflectors of thin film, like the inside of your potato chip bag. Also, eat a lot less meat and dairy. Universities and schools today don't embrace the functions of intuition and emotion very well. That's right. My junior high school had the architectural concept of a shoebox with a few slits for windows, like a prison. You know, well, our Earth is like a prison, and it's going to be maybe 100,000 years or 1,000,000 years before we can get a human colony outside of our solar system. Yes, I acknowledge that we can have a human colony on Mars perhaps in 100 years. And by terraforming, we might be able to use Mars in certain ways. But it's going to take a very long time before any of us, almost none of us, with the exception of a few hundred people, a handful of people, can get on to a different planet. And so the reality is that for almost all of us, we are condemned to this planet, and we are either going to make it sink, or we're going to be swimming. So with that, my voice is shot, as it often gets after 2 hours of soliloquy. So I'm going to terminate for today. And thank you so much for joining me today. We've had a large following today. And so next week, I'll be talking about the age of the Holy Ghost. And that is on page 35 of this essay. And so I doubt if we'll get through the end of the essay next week. But anyway, this has been the 11th week of talking about the details of this one essay in this group. So I urge you to take a look at these. There's actually 70 essays now. So I've been working with Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. I've been dealing with essay 1 in volume 1. There are currently 4 volumes published, and a 5th will be issued next April. So thank you all for coming and listening. I appreciate the large YouTube audience, and thank you, thank you, Yuan, Nick, and Nicole for being here. I appreciate your presence too. That helps push me along. So thank you. So have a great day.
Thank you.
Peace. Take care.